All right, this is probably the most important of this series. Um, this is Attorney General John Ashcroft and the FBI Director Robert Mueller in a media press briefing dated September 27, 2001, where for the first time they match the names of the hijackers with faces. And this is 15 days after the attacks of September 11, 2001. Let's see what they have to say.
Good afternoon. Today we are releasing the photographs of 19 hijackers of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center towers, into the Pentagon, and into the rural area in Pennsylvania. This is another step in what, in effect, is part of a national neighborhood watch. We've been receiving tens of thousands of tips from across the country as individuals have provided for us information valuable to this investigation. As a matter of fact, this week the combined total of tips from the public over the internet and through the telephone hotline passed 100,000. It is our hope that the release of these photos will prompt others who may have seen the hijackers or been in contact with them to contact the FBI with any information they may have that would be helpful to the investigation. I'm also able to announce today that the administration has sent to Congress another critically important piece of legislation to aid in the financial front that was opened in the war against terrorism recently. The legislation is legislation that was developed prior to September the 11th. This legislation covers money laundering in a broad sense, but will also help us address the funds that may be flowing to and from terrorist organizations. The Money Laundering Act of 2001, like the other legislative changes we have asked the Congress to enact, contains careful, considered provisions that will give law enforcement the additional tools needed to identify, track down, and neutralize international terrorist groups.
Also, at the same time, the Secretary of State Colin Powell had been in contact with Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Waziristan, as well as local Afghan commanders to the north of Afghanistan, like the Northern Alliance and Rashid Dotson, in their full and unequivocal support against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Something that the CIA, well, there was a split within the CIA regarding the fight against the Taliban, but now there was a full committal after 9/11. And with that comes the CIA, the Special Activities Division under Hank Crumpton. And then you have U.S. Special Forces, the U.S. Army Rangers, in their fight against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Now, this was the Battle of Tora Bora, in which later on they would have bin Laden almost surrounded, trapped between the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan in an area called the White Mountains, where there's the highest valleys of Afghanistan, and behind and after those peaks was the valley into Pakistan, where bin Laden escaped because the State Department did not approve for the CIA to have additional special forces to engage against bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. The leader of that operation was Gary Bernstein. The name of the operation was Jawbreaker, which was part of the Battle of Tora Bora. So there was a lot going on in these 2 weeks afterwards of 9/11, because at this point you had one half of the State Department, which was Colin Powell, Richard Clark, Condoleezza Rice, John Ashcroft in the full engagement for Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the dual Israeli citizens, the neocons like Richard Perle and Douglas Wurmser and Douglas Feig and Paul Wolfowitz, who have more power, and Richard Armitage, who have more power, more influence, because they had the president in their full committal for Iraq.
For example,
It'll pause every once in a while after
the ability for terrorist organizations to finance the atrocities they commit in this country with money generated by crimes committed in other countries is critical to their success. This legislation would make it a crime to launder the proceeds of foreign crimes in the United States. One of the financing mechanisms used by terrorists is the smuggling of large amounts of cash into the country and the transportation of this cash throughout the United States. We would make it a crime to smuggle more than $10,000 in currency into or out of the country, or to transport more than $10,000 in interstate commerce with the intent to use the money to commit a criminal offense. We're also asking for Congress to permit federal courts to restrain the assets of a criminal defendant, such as a terrorist, pending trial, in order to prevent the transfer of his or her assets to others in the terrorist network. A current law allows post-conviction forfeiture judgments. We believe that it makes sense to allow the freezing of such assets earlier, before a terrorist has the opportunity to protect his assets by transferring them to others.
Now remember, a lot of these regulations would become more prominent today than they were at the time. And remember, the word or the definition of terrorist can mean many things. It doesn't have to mean radical Islamic fundamentalist. And again, all you have to do is take a look at what they charged with some of those idiots on January 6th. I'm not approving of what they did because they went on really stupid inclinations where they could have had the full backing of the people from the left had they gone, say, repealing against the Second Amendment or, the rising cost of inflation that's hurting everybody. But no, they went there thinking that they were going to overturn the election, which is, fucking stupid. They should know that the electoral process is already partly rigged anyway. And they're still playing the game. But like I said, if you want to go storm the Capitol on a sound premise, which involves everybody, you'll have more in number. But those idiots at January 6th were listening to people like Alex Jones. And they're easily manipulated, these people, because they have the premise of faith. Now, these people already believe in God, right? Where a lot of these people basically believe in just a fictitious God, because the God they believe in basically doesn't exist. It's a twisted caricature of the individual of Jesus Christ in the Bible. They can't admit that, Christ was actually a liberal in most cases. And to them, liberalism is a disease. But what they don't realize is that liberalism is gone, and so is classic conservative. The classic senses, anyway. What we have left is the extremes involving the left of politics and the right of politics, which are basically just two wings of the same bird.
These and
it's ridiculous.
Other provisions in the legislation we have sent to Congress will aid law enforcement on the financial front of the war against terrorism that was launched by the President earlier this week. These money laundering proposals were introduced in the House of Representatives in the past two Congresses and were passed by the House Subcommittee on Crime with overwhelming bipartisan support in those settings. Some of these proposals are also part of a bill already introduced by Senators Levin and Grassley in the United States Senate. Now, this contribution to our ability to choke off the money supply to terrorist organizations is more needed than ever. And we
You
urge
got to
Congress to move.
understand, in the first, after the month, after 9/11, for that 30-day period after 9/11, more invasive legislation was passed than any point in history at this time. You had the Patriot Act, and then you had the full approval for the CIA to basically create kill lists. This was approved by the president in a meeting with the director, George Tenet, and the director of the Counterterrorism Center, Covert Black. And at the same time, there was also full bipartisan support in having the NSA collect metadata on, say, foreign individuals that were living inside the United States, but that went abroad. They did this without a warrant. And also, um, for anybody who is a suspected terrorist and is a foreign combatant, not a domestic one, but a foreign combatant, say somebody from Afghanistan or Iraq, the Geneva Conventions won't apply to them. This was passed. A citizen doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be a U.S. citizen. It could be an illegal immigrant. They come to the United States. They are afforded certain rights, which was protected under the Constitution. Today, there's an argument over whether these people basically have any rights, and that they could be sent to, places like Guantanamo. I'm not joking. Oh, what do we care? They're not legal immigrants because you know what? You're next. That's what the fuck that means. You vote left. Oh, hey, wait a minute. This is he votes left, Democrat. They vote, they're for socialism. They're for communism and terrorism. Put them in jails, and a public will approve. Yes, and then what else is next? Until you're last, and then you get the guillotine. Now, I sometimes wonder if the people deserve it.
Quickly to enact these critical and important changes in the framework of our effort to curtail crime in general and terrorism in specific. Director.
Good afternoon. As the Attorney General has pointed out, today the FBI is releasing photographs of 19 individuals believed to be the hijackers aboard the 4 airliners that crashed on September 11th. These photographs have helped investigators across the nation and indeed across the world to uncover information related to the hijackers and their potential associates. And we are releasing the pictures to the public at this time in the hopes that they will lead to further advances in the investigation. I want to encourage anyone who has information based upon these photographs to contact our FBI immediately, either through our toll-free hotline.
A lot of those pictures, as you can see there, were from passports or from visas, either in their home countries in Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, or Jeddah, or here in the United States. They had ID cards, these people. They had driver's licenses, they had their visas, they had passports. Some passports survived. I think it was like 3 or 4 in general.
Which is 1-866-483-5137. Again, 1-866-483-5137, or through our website, which is at www.ifccfbi.gov. I want to turn for a moment to another aspect of our responsibilities. As reported yesterday, federal indictments were returned on 2 hate crime investigations. These investigations related to attacks on Arab or Muslim Americans. These indictments were based on FBI investigations in the Salt Lake City and Seattle field offices. And these indictments are proof that those who attempt to take out their anger and frustration on innocent Americans will be investigated and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. To date, we've initiated approximately 90 hate crime investigations across the country in over 30 FBI field offices. And we remain committed to working with the various Arab American, Muslim American, and Sikh American communities to assure that any such acts are vigorously investigated and prosecuted. I want to add that I met earlier today with key leaders of the Arab American, Muslim American, and Sikh American communities, and we addressed issues of mutual concern and discussed ways which we could together address those concerns. I want to today acknowledge the outpouring of support and cooperation that the FBI has received from these communities, not only in the course of our investigation, but in response to our call last week for translators. We literally were inundated with volunteers from any one of the Arab American, Muslim American, Sikh American communities, and I want to thank those communities for their assistance in this regard, as well as their assistance in our investigations. Turning to the investigation, as the Attorney General pointed out, we've had over 100,000 tips on our hotline and telephone, on our website and our hotline. And we actually have in excess of 200,000 leads that we are currently investigating. I'll tell you that our primary focus, in addition to bringing to justice those responsible for the attacks on September 11th, but our primary focus is on preventing potential future attacks. We are working hard to identify and locate associates of the hijackers who may pose a threat to this nation. But I want to ask and urge every American to join us in heading off any possible terrorist attacks in the future. We greatly appreciate them.
No, I just want to sharp in here. Now, look, in the years prior to 9/11, there was suspected financing from, say, Osama bin Laden's brother-in-law, Mohammed Jamal Khalifa, under the one of his many businesses. One of them was Consol Joya, which is located in the Philippines, and this was a base for a lot of operations that were, attacking Christian churches, for example. The Abu Sayyaf group, which was headed by, one of them was headed by Ridwan Samudin, whose Nam de Gore is Tambali, who's currently in Guantanamo today. You also had members of the Jemaah Islamiyah, which is in Indonesia. And they were responsible, which was another affiliate for bin Laden and al-Qaeda, which actually conducted the second largest terrorist operation after 9/11, which was the 2002 Bali bombings. So the FBI knew about these groups, but I mean, they had so much intelligence. The conspiracy is that, with the director of the CIA and the FBI, the NSA, they all went to the House Select Committees for their fiscal years, where they asked for more money because they lack manpower. But what they don't tell you is that they didn't lack information. The information just wasn't shared or wasn't acted upon. Right now, they'll say, "Well, listen, we had so much intelligence, so many central intelligence reports, so many cables, personal and information only, that it was impossible to pinpoint, where." The next attack was from, or where the money was coming from, or who these operatives are. And that's not not usually the case in this instance, because here you have a threat to the airline industry starting as far back as 95, who took care of that, had they acted on the information, which was serious. And this is coming from an insider like Jamal al-Fadl, who was an original al-Qaeda member that turned informant, and then went to Washington headquarters and spoke with a Chicago lawyer, Patrick Fitzgerald, and basically told him that, here's how al-Qaeda works, and this is where the threats are coming from. And then you had, informant like this individual that was part of the bombing operation in the East Africa bombings, an Egyptian that was part of the team, and the FBI didn't believe him and deported him. And there was intelligence about threats to those buildings. And then they got another person working with the FBI and the CIA that was also a triple agent named Ali Muhammad, who was a former U.S. former U.S. Special Forces translator, soldier, and basically were giving information back and forth and sharing it with the FBI, the CIA, and also al-Qaeda. He's allegedly, supposedly, the person who trained some of these 9/11 hijackers and how to hijack a plane. So it's, I mean, and that's just, the FBI with domestic intelligence. Now, when it comes to international intelligence, Al Qaeda, that's the NSA, CIA, and they weren't sharing that with the FBI. So imagine if everybody was working together. And just, don't forget the Defense Intelligence Agency through their program, Able Danger. Okay, imagine all four of these agencies working together, sharing information. 9/11 would have never happened, and probably East Africa bombings either.
Many Americans who have stepped forward with information, and we call upon any citizen who has information that may be helpful to contact your local FBI office. Thank you, and I think we'll be happy to answer some questions.
Director,
Yes, sir.
how many people have been arrested so far for obtaining fraudulent hazardous material transport licenses? And do you still believe that some of these people may be connected to suspects in the investigation?
Well, across the United States, there have been individuals questioned with regard, and those individuals have hazardous material transport licenses. They've been questioned. I know there are several arrests have been made in Pennsylvania, arising out of an investigation in Pennsylvania, and it is our preliminary belief that those arrests do not relate in any way, or the individuals arrested pursuant to that investigation do not relate to the occurrences of September 11th of this month. Yes, sir.
Can you say whether any of the people who have been taken in as material witnesses or cases that are under seal, which obviously you can't talk about, but are any of those cases directly related to these individuals and the plot of September 11th?
As you correctly point out, whatever is occurring with regard to the material witness warrants, that is under seal, and I can't speak to those. Yes, sir.
How certain can you be that these are the correct names and photographs of the 19 hijackers? And can you give us some more guidance on how you actually arrived at those conclusions?
Sure. The photographs that will be passed out to you, and you see behind us, are photographs identified with the names on the manifest. And those names on the manifest we've identified as being the hijackers. These photographs are photographs that may come from passports, driver's license obtained in the United States, or other identification documents. Consequently, these photographs we've identified with the individuals whose names appear on the manifest. What we are currently doing is determining whether, when these individuals came to the United States, these were their real names or they changed their names for use with false identification in the United States. That false identification being utilized up to and on the day of September 11th, and that false identification used to purchase the tickets, and thereby being the name on the manifests of the planes that went down. Our investigation has reached out to a number of countries to determine whether or not these individuals definitively, and the photographs we have here and the names associated with these photographs, are the actual identities of the individuals prior to the time they came to the United States.
Now, let me fill you in on a couple of things. One, that the people all named on that photo, in the photographs, are most of them that came out later. The families come out and said, yes, that's them, and the names are correct. Now, they did use slight misspellings of their names when they were inside the United States, but they really didn't have to hide their identity, because a lot of these guys are muscle hijackers that came into the country in August of 2001. Except for the pilot hijackers like Muhammad Atta, Hani Hanjour, Khalid Abidar Nawapa Hadbi, who were selected as pilot hijackers initially, then replaced by Hani Hanjour because they didn't go to their flight lessons, Marwan al-Shehi and Muhammad Atta, Marwan al-Shehi, Ziad Jar. So, and also too, the FBI had collected the DNA of all 19 of these men, and they are still labeled unknown to this very day. And the reason is this: because the families all live abroad, the FBI could not get a sample of their DNA. and didn't go out of their way to go to those countries to get any DNA. And none of these family members were willing to give any samples to the FBI. They weren't pressured to give any. And so they were not formally, exemplary identified. They're suspected. Even to this very day, they're suspected terrorists. Even though I think these are the men that hijacked the plane, but I happen to think that there were more and that they didn't take off because the Federal Aviation Administration had ordered a stand down. But the first initial stand down was held by Gerald Arpry, the acting director for United Airlines, and a hero. So there you have it. It's like these guys are still suspected terrorists. And sometimes you'll hear me say that. Suspected pilot hijacker, suspected hijackers, because they were never charged or they were never positively identified, because the DNA even though it's collected from the dead people, could not be properly identified because none of the loved ones, the family members, had give their DNA to the FBI.
You never
Yes,
to identify whether
I wonder why they never did. The FBI never asked.
any of these people
Or if
are
they did,
connected
they
to terrorist groups, including Osama bin Laden.
we believe that one or more of them do have contacts with Al-Qaeda. Next.
Yes, sir. Do you have any information linking Osama bin Laden or any terrorist groups to the people who illegally obtained the
I
hazmat
wonder. Wait. I want to go back to
These
that.
people are connected to terrorist groups, including Osama bin Laden.
We believe that one or more of them do have contacts with Al-Qaeda.
And the FBI would know this. Okay, Khalid al-Hazmi. I mean, at this point, the names match with the faces. The intelligence is known now. The CIA gave their information after 9/11. On the day of 9/11, they gave their information to Ali Soufan, who was in Yemen. It was a CIA officer that gave him the folder with the pictures of the men at the Malaysia summit meeting, and it was Khalid al-Hazmi. So the FBI knew, and this is 15, this is 14, I'm sorry, this is 16 days later after 9/11. So it's not a secret. I wonder why Mueller didn't come out with this. I don't know why.
Next.
Strange.
Yes, sir. Do you have any information linking Osama bin Laden or any terrorist groups to the people who illegally obtained the hazmat licenses from a Pittsburgh Examiner? And also, can you say, are there potential terrorists who are operating hazmat vehicles or with access to them in the United States right now?
As to the
Good
first part of the
question.
question, I think I indicated that we do not believe that those currently under arrest as a result of the investigation in Pennsylvania are related to the hijackings and the crashes of the airliners on September 11th. As to the second part of the question, we are looking at individuals who have obtained hazmat licenses, and particularly those individuals that may have obtained them under suspicious circumstances, and we are tracking those leads. Yes, sir.
I am wondering, and I could be wrong, I'm wondering the arrests in Pennsylvania are alluding to two individuals. And for those in the know, and I mean really in the fucking know, you know who I'm talking about. Roy Barak and Modi Bhupal, two individuals who work for Urban Moving Systems that were pulled over in a town called York, Pennsylvania, that's nearby the freeway that leads to Shanksville. And they were coming, according to them, they were coming from a move, I think, in Chicago. And they were arrested because in the truck there was no furniture. And so they called the manager, Dominic Suter, and said, "Hey, do you know about these two individuals?" He said, "Yes." He goes, "But due to the prior days, and they were arrested the day after 9/11, they went past Pennsylvania to Chicago on September 11th, and on September 12th they were coming back." and then they got pulled over because there was a bulletin for any urban moving systems truck. And so they got pulled over. They said we were coming from a move. There was no furniture in the truck. So we got no furniture. So they called the manager. The manager says, you got these guys who are coming out of state to New Jersey, which is where the headquarters of urban moving system is, Weehawken, and basically said that, hey, they were coming from a move. And Dominic Suter said that he found it strange because due to the day's prior events, we didn't have any out-of-state moves. I wonder if he's talking about that or something else entirely. If not, that's a very rare tidbit of information that I just told you, but it is true.
How large of a support network do you think you're looking for in the United States? And they've made reference repeatedly, I guess, to ask for help from people to head off future attacks. Do you feel like those attacks, do you have any sense that those attacks are imminent or have you been able to foil them?
Well, I think it's fair to say we're under a heightened state of alert, and without any specificity as to a particular target, a particular place, or a particular time. But we're under a heightened state of alert, and we asked anybody who believes that they may have information as to a potential terrorist attack to give their local FBI office a call. Yes, ma'am.
Director, how many of the 19 are you certain of? Can you say that you're certain of the identities, that they did not pick up false identities of any of the 19?
Well, I think we are fairly certain on a number of them. But you will see in the packages that we put out that we have not indicated those that we are certain on, in the hopes that we will obtain more information that will assist us in making an absolute positive identification of the photograph, with the identification in the United States, with the identification of the individual from the life that they led prior to the time they came to the United States. Yes, sir.
Now, let me also fill you in. This is interesting. Now, Joseph Trento, Joe and Susan Trento, who wrote Unsafe at Any Altitude, which is a great book, talks about the hijackings and the airport, the lack of airport security, proper security protocols that led to the success of these attacks. Talked with an individual named Ed Nelson, who was a manager of security at Dulles, and said that during the afternoon of September 11th, late afternoon, the FBI came. And this is like 2 or 3 hours after 9/11, and they were looking at the camera systems at Logan and positively identified the individuals going through screening by name. How the fuck would they know that? Makes you fucking wonder, right? Did the FBI know about some of these guys? Or all of them? Maybe one or two? I don't know. But this is on September 11, 2001. Ed Nelson, name of that supervisor, when interviewed by Joe Trento, said that, yes, he was there in the room and allowed for the FBI agents, 2 of them, to come inside and view the video. And they said that they knew them by name.
Any indication that any of these suspects are related in the case of, say, and Sullivan?
There is some indication by names and otherwise that one or more of the hijackers is related to one or more of the hijackers. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know if any of them have associates who may have left the country either shortly before or after? Have you been able to track any of that?
Without getting the details, I cannot get into the details of the investigation, but I can assure you that we are attempting to identify any associates of the hijackers and trace their movements within the United States, assuming they were still here, and overseas. Yes, ma'am.
Follow-up. Sir, can I just ask a quick follow-up? Because knowing how easy it was for them to get fake IDs, how can you assure people that these people, if they left the country, may not be able to come back in and get other fake IDs? How do you prevent something like that?
Well, we have a heightened scrutiny at the borders with immigration, to the extent that we have identified individuals as being associates of one or more of the hijackers. We also identify any aliases they may have used. And whenever an individual is put on the watch list, they're put on with a photograph with the name they're believed to be using, as well as any names they may have used in the past. Yes, sir.
I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe at the time, the FAA's terrorist watch list had 19 names on it. 19, just fucking 19 names. After 9/11 was in the hundreds. So it was a lot more stricter. But yeah, I think it was at 19 names from I think it was from the tip-off database. I think is the name of it. The terrorist watch list database. So was it 19? I mean, after all the years of threats by, bin Laden, why was it bin Laden on the terrorist watch list?
Why
Oh my God.
Dr. Alhamdi was apparently denied access to an attorney for 6 days, and are you satisfied that all those several hundred have been given legal representation if it's desired?
We do not detain persons for questioning. When we go out and interview individuals, we may find that they have information that is necessary to the investigation, and in such case, if there is predication for obtaining a material witness warrant, we go to a judge and explain to the judge that this individual has information relevant to the investigation. We believe the grand jury should hear that information, that testimony, and we believe there's a risk of flight, and a judge determines that a material witness warrant should issue. Once that individual is presented or arrested and then presented to the court, the judge then supervises the timing and the assurance of the presentation to the grand jury. And after that, the person is generally, once they have satisfactorily testified, released. Alternatively, we will go out and interview individuals, and if we find that they are out of status illegally in this country, they will be detained by the INS. Alternatively, and the third alternative is that we will find that an individual we wish to interview is the subject of a criminal case. It could be federal, state, or local, and the person may be detained to respond to those charges. Those are the only three ways that individuals have been detained in the course of this investigation.
And that's basically it, with the investigation, right? I mean, with the press briefing. But let me begin by saying this: is that in the years after 9/11, I think it was 2 or 3 years after, when the CIA began interrogating with the enhanced interrogation techniques, also known as torture, on Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi bin Ashib and Mustafa al-Hassawi and Abdulaziz Ali and Ridwan of Samudin, Tawfiq bin Atash, a lot of these others, Mamadou al-Slahi and Mansour Adayifi and, countless, I think it was over 600 people, then the FBI got their information. A lot of this was coerced, false testimony, false information, and they went with it because the CIA said this is good information, right? So they gave it to the FBI to look into domestic matters, not international, domestic matters. And then in the years between, say, 2005 to 2010, that 5-year period, there was mass arrests. In fact, I remember in the New York Daily News and the New York Times that, through certain journalists who'd done their own investigations into the Department of Justice and the New York City Joint Terrorism Task Force, on harassment of Muslim Americans, and there was a lot of fabricated evidence to go with the amount of people that were suspected of terrorism, and these people were arrested. And a lot of these plots basically didn't materialize, or they fizzled out, or just didn't happen. But yet the people that were suspected of being involved with these, plots, were arrested, detained, and held without warrant and deemed enemy combatants and were not given their civil rights afforded through the Geneva Convention because these are foreign enemy combatants because of the Bush administration's approval, which was bipartisan approval for these invasive laws that are basically unconstitutional and uncivil. And a lot, like I said, a lot of these laws that were passed in 2001 are going to be used on Americans one day because they'll be modified throughout the years. This is the reason why the Patriot Act is now called the Freedom Act. It's just freedom for what? Was it Al Qaeda that basically created the Utah data center, which is a large building in Flying Buff, Utah, that collects your emails, phone calls, and text messages? No, that was the fucking U.S. federal government with the full approval of the Democrat and Republican from the House and Senate. Full approval across the board. So, and look, there was 19 men involved with this hijacking of 4 planes, right? Doesn't seem much. And when you compare it to bin Laden and Al Qaeda in the 1990s, where there was maybe at max, maybe around the world, 2,000 fighters, max, okay? Compare it to now. Al Qaeda is now in the tens of thousands, and their whole countries, Afghanistan and Syria. Plus, you got affiliates in North Africa, the Sudan, the Congo, the Arabian Peninsula, Yemen, Libya, and Islamic State in Khorasan in Afghanistan, who are fighting, the Taliban. But a lot of these entities are now condensing because of the leadership in Afghanistan under Hamza bin Laden and Saif al-Adil. No one knows who the emir is. I happen to agree with Sarah Adams and Bill Roggio that it's Hamza bin Laden because of the bin Laden name. It carries a lot of weight, even though Saif al-Adil is a longtime member. But he's not, according to the Abbottabad papers, bin Laden didn't want Saif al-Adil to be the leader. And I think he named 3 other people. One was a member of Al-Qaeda in Arabian Peninsula. Another one was in Egypt, I believe. But yeah, Saif al-Adil, he didn't think was a quiet leader. So I think it's Hamza bin Laden. So look at what they have now. Tens of thousands of fighters. And how many would be involved in a terrorist operation that I feel is going to come throughout disastrous foreign policy that no one wants to talk about. All right, listen, guys, thank you very much for tuning in. And we got a couple more videos regarding these press briefings. It's not over yet. I believe we have maybe 17 more. There's more investigation involved. And they're important to talk about because it's for history and historical context as well as understanding about how the intelligence agencies operate. And it's good to know because it's relevant to the present times. And I want you to get ready, for, a major attack inside the United States because our government is conducting itself rather improper and immoral and evil regarding what's happening around the world, especially in Gaza, Yemen, and in Afghanistan, Syria, and elsewhere. It's just, it's all going to come back to bite us. And so by doing these videos, I'm hoping to educate you and, warn you proper, So, all right, guys, thank you very much for tuning in and see you in the next video. Take care, everybody.